Hello and welcome to the Avrum Rosenzweig Show.
Welcome to one of the internet's best podcasts, where we dive deep into the lives of the extraordinary and fascinating people who leave an indelible mark on our world. Join us as we explore their captivating stories, remarkable achievements, and unique perspectives that shape history and inspire generations. Get ready to embark on a journey through the lives of inspiring people unlike any other.
Hey folks, welcome to the show. My name is Avrum Rosenzweig, and I am delighted to be here, and I thank you very much for joining me. I may cough throughout the interview a little bit. I've had COVID for about a week, and thank God I'm feeling much better, but you'll bear with me. At the top of my shows, generally, I like to give sort of a preface as to what we're doing here and why it is that I invited on the guests whom I have invited on. Um, we all have a struggle in life. Some of our struggles are much greater than other people's. We'll look at someone and we'll say, my gosh, their life is so beautiful. It's so easy. Look how seamless it is. I generally think that's a misnomer. I think that everybody has a fight. You never know where somebody is until you start to talk to them. You start to get to know them a little bit. And it's always a very strengthening and very encouraging for me when I meet somebody like my guest, Benji Rosenzweig, welcome, who I know has gone through his own personal struggles in life and has come out of it, thank God, on top. And with that, we wish him well always. So I want to introduce him to you, and I think that you're going to enjoy this interview because he's a very eclectic person and someone who, despite the fact that he has been challenged by some very difficult things, he's been disciplined and he's overcome many of them, and we look forward to hearing about it. So, Benji, welcome and thanks for doing this.
Thank you for having me, Avrum. It's wonderful to be here. I appreciate you, and I hope I live up to the kind things that you say about me.
Well, do your best.
I'm trying, man.
Yeah, do your best, man. Benji Rosenzweig is a multifaceted advocate. He's a speaker, he's a creative force dedicated to making a positive impact through music, storytelling, and community engagement. Now, here's the interesting thing: there's only two people in the world who could say this. I am one of them, and Benji is the other. His father was a rabbi in Kitchener, Rabbi Rosenzweig. My father was a rabbi in Kitchener, Ontario, Canada, also Rabbi Rosenzweig. Granted, we spell our names differently, but that to me, when I heard about it, I had to stop talking for a moment and sort of take it in and ask him, what do you mean? So we're going to find out about that in a moment. For any of you who spent time in Israel way back in the 70s and early 80s, you will remember the Diaspora Yeshiva Band. They're still around, but really that was at the genesis, I believe, the formation of their band when they were singing songs like Pitchuli and Sadiq Tamar. I know that because I went to yeshiva in Jerusalem, and every Saturday night we used to go over to the Diaspora Yeshiva, I believe it was called, and there they would be singing Rock and Roll Man to Jewish lyrics. One of the members and one of the individuals who wrote those songs was indeed Benji's father, Rabbi Yossel Rosenzweig, God bless his soul. Benji is a passionate advocate for special needs, and he is inspired by his beautiful daughter's journey, who has a syndrome, and you'll tell me if I am expressing this properly. Coffin-Siris, is that correct?
Very clear. Yeah, Coffin-Siris.
Cyrus. He is married to Sarah. His daughter's name is Ela. His other daughter's name is Nama, and he's a commercial real estate broker in Detroit, Michigan. So welcome to the show, Benji. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you for having me, Avrum. I'm going to make one correction, and we're going to start off with a story right from the beginning. So my father was never a member of the Diaspora Yeshiva Band.
Oh, he was not? Oh.
He was not. But before there was a Diaspora Yeshiva Band, there was a duo of my dad, Yossel Rosenzweig, and his friend, Avrum Rosenblum.
Yes.
And Avrum spelled the same way that you spell yours.
Yes.
And the two of them were an acoustic duo, and they would play all over Israel. They would play just folk rock essentially, and they were fantastic. And Avrum said to my dad, "Hey man, we got to turn this into a proper band, and we're going to take over the world with this stuff." My dad was like, "Yeah, I just had some kids and starting a business. Take the songs, run with it. God bless, you're going to do great." And that's exactly what Avram did. And so my dad, while he was never officially a member of the band, on the early records, you'll see his name as credited for songwriting. And he wrote a number of their hits, including Malchutcha and Asela Shemecha and Vahu Rachum and Tzaddik and Pitchuli and, a lot of those. And
They were one kick-ass band. We used to go there on Saturday night, as I mentioned, and it was really exciting for me because I was only getting into rock and roll at that time. I was 18 years old, and I was instructed on how to listen to the music by my dear friend David Nefesh, who lives in Detroit as well, whom you
Yep.
know.
Yep.
And I would sit there and I would be mesmerized by the fellow on lead guitar, by the guy on horns, their drums. It was just really something to hear Jewish lyrics played to that music, which I think in those days was somewhat unusual. Would that be right?
Yeah. They were pioneers in their musical style, and so they took the simplicity of the Shlomo Carlebach 2 or 3 chord jam, where you're almost in a trance, just meditating on a mantra, which Carlebach was he was the master of that. And they infused it with the Allman Brothers, right, where there's a structure and then just go to town, and they really were the first of that generation's Jewish rock, and they did something special. And those who it's pretty interesting to go to a synagogue in another city with my kids and hear a song being sung from the bima, and I look over at my daughter and she's like, "Oh, that's Zadie's song," and I'm like, "Yeah, that's Zadie's song." It's a pretty special moment.
Where are the boys now? What happened to the Asbury Yeshiva band?
They're all over the country. Moshe Shore, I believe, he's in New York. He worked for Hillel, I believe, for a long time. Avrum's in Baltimore. Menachem Herman is still playing music in Israel. Ruby Harris is in Chicago. He's playing music. In fact, about 10, 12 years ago, my dad and I were having a conversation, and he was sort of lamenting that numerous people have recorded his music over the years, but he had never recorded his music. And I said, "All right, well, let's get in a studio and record the music." And we went in, just the two of us, with acoustic guitars and me with a bass, and I was doing like a 3-part acoustic thing. And the recording, the guy who was running the recording studio said to me, "Benji, you're not doing this justice, and you need to get a band and do this properly." And I'm like, "Hey man, I'm paying you for the studio time. You don't have to patronize me." And he was like, "No. He's like, I don't want to do this like this. We need to do this proper." And so I put together a band, and we actually opened up the studio to make it like a live show, and recorded a full album under the name Rabbi'S and the Kosher Gravy Company.
Uh-huh.
And that was sort of a throw to a friend of ours who had a band called the American Gravy Company. He was a friend of mine who lost his battle to the disease of addiction, and his band, American Gravy Company. And we sort of put those two together, and it was pretty awesome. And unfortunately, shortly after that, my dad got sick. And so the whole idea of a tour and selling records and all that never happened because his health just couldn't sustain it. And so, but I have that piece of media. I have the music, I have the video, and, I have some pretty spectacular memories and made some wonderful friends along the way on that.
I never had the chance to do something like that for my father. He died when he was 61 years old, in 1989. And I'm curious, I know that you had your struggles with your dad as well, which you managed to fix up in part because of this.
Mhm.
What was it like to give your dad that? How did he respond to that?
Uh, my dad was a complicated man. I think my dad appreciated the fact that, back up for a second. My dad had a really firm belief that Kibbutz Av is the cardinal rule of all. Um,
Respecting your father.
Respecting your parents, respecting your elders, respecting the people who got you here. And his parents, I call my grandfather my North Star, right? My grandfather was an Auschwitz survivor. My grandfather was a giant in my eyes, and in the eyes of many others. And so, sort of that kibbutz av for my father to his father was a no-brainer. The kibbutz av from me to my father was a little bit more work. And I think that as me and my dad were able to sort of repair and process and enjoy a relationship, I think that um, he very much enjoyed the fact that he was sort of, bearing the fruits of that conversation.
And he liked you?
Most days. I mean, when I was a teenager, he definitely didn't, but I think in the later years, we got along pretty well. So,
Yeah.
and by the way, he was probably right for not liking me when I was a teenager.
Yeah, you think so? Why is that?
Yeah, I was a schmuck. I was an unpleasant teenager. I had a pretty bad chip on my shoulder. You know, things weren't. We've talked about this before the recording, right? I'm in recovery. I'm a drug addict. I'm an alcoholic. I've been in recovery for a fairly long time, but my teenage years were spent ramping up an unpleasant drug addiction, and so his displeasure was good common sense.
Yeah, the reason I responded the way I did is because listen, our kids are our kids are our kids, and you know this as a parent, right? And even if they're
Sure.
schmucks, you got to stay in the game. Did your dad stay in the game with you?
Um, no, but we all have our cross to bear, and
Yeah.
I won't make him wrong. He, we were speaking earlier. My mother passed away when I was 15. My dad was sort of left holding the bag, didn't know what he was supposed to be doing. He left a lot to be desired. He didn't handle it as well as some would hope. But I think that for me, the past is the past, and I think that he was navigating a difficult life with far less tools than I navigate life. And you know, I could sit here and tell you all the things that he did wrong, and it wouldn't change him. I'd rather sit here and tell you that he did a couple things really well.
Ah, you're a good boy. You're a good son. Good for you.
Yeah.
You
I
know,
hope
I
my kids. I hope my kids give me that grace one day.
Oh, listen, man. Like I said, we just met, but I get a real strong sense that you're very present. You're likely very present for them. And I saw the TED talk that you did having to do with your daughter, and it
Hmm.
was magnificent, just magnificent, Benji. We'll talk about that shortly. I remember growing up, and we all remember this, where we were in camp. I went to Camp Gun Israel in Flint, Michigan. Um, and there was a fellow there actually from Detroit, and his father, he had to leave camp because his father was murdered. He ran a store, and he had to leave camp and go back and obviously tend to his family needs. And I remember thinking to myself, my gosh, what is it like to be 13 or 14 or 15 to lose a parent, to lose your dad, or to lose your mom? You lost your mom when you were 15 years old. What was that like for you?
Oh, I have a 15-year-old daughter now, and I can't imagine being able to express that sadness to her. Right? I mean, that's a mind trip. I channeled my energy negatively. Yeah, I wish I had like a real positive story there. I went to a yeshiva that understood that keeping me there and close to home was probably better than any other alternative. And so they essentially said, "Hey, man, fly under the radar and don't do anything public where we have to kick you out, and we'll hold you close to the vest." Which is both a blessing and a curse. I've got a lot of gratitude for the fact that they allowed me to stay there despite the fact that I wasn't doing the things that they wanted me to do. But I also respected the fact that I kept things under the radar so that I didn't force them to kick me out. I channeled that energy into a get out of jail free card with that school. And found drugs and alcohol to be a fine companion for dealing with both negative and positive emotions. I sort of went stoic, sort of like that dead inside. Nothing bothers me. I'm tougher than the guy next to me. Yeah, that's how I dealt with it. I found myself going to a lot of concerts and enjoying music and fun and tour and sort of. I one time saw a video clip of Jerry Garcia saying, "I'm choosing fun in this lifetime," and I was like, "Hey, if that's an option, I'm taking that one."
Yeah, I'll go for
I'll
that
go for
one.
that
Sure.
one. I griped about how the yeshiva system wasn't a good education and wasn't good and wasn't capable of giving us the tools. And then I watched my peers become rocket scientists and rabbis and think tank operators for the government and write books and start companies and I flunked out of college because I'd rather tell you how wrong you are than actually do the work to get there. And so it was a combination of a rough hand to be dealt. But I didn't, I mentioned earlier, my dad didn't handle things. I didn't handle things great either. I didn't have any tools. I didn't have any ability to sort of pick myself up and do something about it until later when I learned that stuff.
Yeah, how did you do it? How did you turn things around?
How did I turn things around? So I hit rock bottom, realized I'd become one of those people, right? I don't think we have enough time on this podcast to do the whole story. But I woke up with an IV in my arm with some medics who were reviving me and basically said to me, "Hey man, you're either going to do this or you're going to die. Like, get it together." And I was at a music festival with some sober folks who said to me, "You're either going to die or you're going to get sober. Like you don't have a third option here." And it wasn't a wake up call. It was like, it was the 55th time that I had gotten that call. But for some reason that day, I realized that like, I don't have another OD in me. I don't have another detox in me. Like I'm done. And I spent some time, what we would call white knuckling it, where I was just staying sober with piss and vinegar in my veins, right? Like I don't have another detox in me. I need to do this. And I was hanging out with some friends who were sober. And one of them said, "So you think that you're better than us because you don't work a program, you don't have a sponsor, you don't go to meetings, you don't do any other work?" And I go, "Yeah." She's like, "Well, what if I told you that the program that we work is not about learning how to not drink. It's about learning how to change your life so that you no longer have the desire to drink and you could just live happy, joyous, and free." And I was like, that's what I want. That's what I'm looking for. I want to remove the desire and I just want to live a decent life. And they were like, "Okay, well, here's some instructions and here's some people and here's what you have to do." And I was like, just give me the instructions, tell me what I have to do, and I will do that. And then I'll do it again and I'll do it again until I get the results that I'm seeing other people get. And that was the, I don't say the beginning of the end. It was the beginning of the beginning, right? That's where my life started getting better, incrementally, you know, just doing the work, uh, sticking to it, and just being there.
Benji, what was the an example of a good life? How that started for you?
Oh, that's a great question. Um, One of the expressions, I love good one-liners. I hate bad one-liners, right? And one of the one-liners that I really dislike, or I used to really dislike, was when people say, "My worst day sober is better than my best day using." And I was always like, pardon my French, I don't know how much French you have on the show, but go fuck yourself. Like, you have no idea how much fun I had when I was out there, and you have no idea how hard it is here. And we were dealing with some difficult stuff early on when my younger daughter Ella was born, and she was sick, and hospital stays and surgeries, and it was hard, man. It was really hard. It was taxing. And my wife and I, my wife was staying at the hospital with my younger daughter, and I was driving home to go be with my older daughter and relieve the babysitter so that she could go home. And I, leaving the hospital, I kissed my wife, and then I was driving home, and I had this moment of clarity where I said, when I was using, I would be sitting with a group of friends at a music festival or at a concert or in one of their apartments or my apartment, whatever it was. I could have 20 of my best friends around me, and we could be doing whatever it was. And I felt alone, and I was not happy. I said, and I'm driving alone in my car, and I'm going to sleep alone in my bed tonight. And I just kissed my wife goodnight, and I'm going to go be there for my daughter, and Sarah's going to be there for our other daughter. And I'm going to go to sleep, and I don't feel alone. I don't feel lonely. And I know that we're doing everything that we have to do to provide a decent life for our kids. And I'm going to sleep alone in my bed tonight, and I'm okay. And I realized that what was to that point, my hardest day sober was probably still better than all those, joyous moments. I don't even call them happy moments, right? Those fun moments that I wasn't really happy. I was lonely in a crowd of people. That's when I sort of realized that this is good. And it's not for everybody. I don't think that everybody should get sober just to get sober. Like, I do it because my options were this or death. So that's how I do it. But if you're able to drink like a gentleman, so to speak, do that. I am not capable of that.
What's parenting like for you? Parenthood.
What is parenting like for me? I feel compelled to try to not make the same mistakes that my parents and grandparents made, but find new ways to make mistakes, right? So I'm going to try to give my kids a good education. I'm trying to give my kids proper tools, and knowing that kids in the early 2000s think that their parents are the worst, and us from the 80s think that our parents were the worst, and my parents thought that their parents were the worst, and like there's these generational trends. And so 20 years from now, we're going to realize how wrong we were in so many things. But I'm just trying to raise kids who have self-worth, who have grounding in community, who can speak up for themselves and have the education to back it up. And if they're happy and feel fulfilled, I've won. I don't know. I think that's if I can achieve that, that's pretty great.
And do you take away stuff from your dad in terms of parenting your own children?
Yeah, sure. That sounded sarcastic, but it wasn't. A lot of times you learn stuff from people of what to do, and a lot of times you learn stuff from people of what not to do. And so I think that the combination of learning from my parents and learning from my grandparents, and both of them did things that were very right, and both of them did things that were very wrong. My parents, anybody who knew my parents, when my mother was still alive, will tell you that my parents had a house that Hachnasat Orchim was like the foundational cornerstone of our house. Friday night was a place where people can come to our house. Shabbat afternoon was a place where people can come to. Like, there were some really important things that I learned positively about raising a family from my parents. And there were other things where I learned, like, hey man, maybe don't do that. And I got that straight from them.
What was one of those don't do that?
Uh, um, uh, Yesterday was my dad's second yard site, so I'm like struggling to like not kick a man while he's down, proverbially. There's a My father's not unique in this, but there's studies that have been done that the children of Holocaust survivors are narcissists. I'm sure I'm not telling you anything that you don't know. I'm sure you've seen those studies and read those books. My grandparents met in Auschwitz, in the DP camp right after Auschwitz. Both of my grandparents were in Auschwitz, and my father was born in April of 1947. So, he was one of the first babies that were born. And my grandparents used to tell stories that people would come and count his fingers and toes to see that he was, physically okay. And there's a level of narcissism that came with that literal idea of Bishvili Nivra Olam, right? The world was created for me, and he really believed that. And so that's one of those things where, that is Bishvili Nivra Olam, is an important life lesson. But if the world was created for me, it was probably also created for you, and so I should treat you as such. And so there's a little bit of humility that's supposed to come with that realization. And I don't know that that those scales were balanced. And for anybody who hears this who was friends with my dad, I'm going to get some pretty angry phone calls, but I'm attempting to answer your question honestly.
Well, something, my father was born in 1928, and it was a tough time to be born. And you mentioned before something which was really, I felt, very, very important, very salient, which is that your father didn't have the tools that you have. And I would argue the same. My father did not have the tools that I had. They were born during or right after the Depression. One morning they woke up and they found out my father was born in Toronto. 6 million Jews were murdered, some of whom were his family. It was a lot of anti-Semitism at that time in Toronto, in all major metropolitan cities. They lived tough lives. They were not simple lives. There wasn't a lot of time to be introspective like you and I have, right?
Right.
I think your point is very well taken.
Yeah, listen, it's very easy for us to criticize our dads. I think that 20 years from now, our children can write books on the mistakes that we made.
Granted, yes. I have an 18-year-old son, and I am always hoping and praying, Benji, that I am doing a reasonable job. I really am, because I love him with all my heart, and he's everything to me. And I think you alluded to the fact that parenting, like, I always felt as though I wasn't enough for myself. And that's not even necessarily in a self-deprecating way. When you have to reach out to your child who's in front of you and needs you for pretty much everything, there evolves within you a large level of unselfishness, of giving, of love. And you seem to be a very loving fellow. So I'm going to guess that those two little ones, your children, your daughters, brought out some absolute beauty inside of you. That's my guess.
I hope that that's accurate. I try.
What is Sarah like? Your wife? What's she like?
My wife is an incredibly smart, an incredibly compassionate person. She's a social worker. She's a special needs mom. She is able to shoulder a lot of stuff that I just don't have the gray matter or attention span to be able to do. So, it's funny when you talk about like equality and gender roles and things like that. And it's like, she's not doing that because she's a woman, and I'm not doing that because I'm a man. She's doing that because that's what she's able to do in our household, and I'm doing this because that's what I'm able to do in the household. And one time we were joking that she was like, gender roles are not okay, except for when it comes to killing bugs. Don't bother me. You are the man, and you are the bug killer. And so we have a pretty good sense of humor. I thank God that she has the ability to keep track of medications and schedules and appointments. And I get lost, when a doctor says something to me and I'm like, I don't understand why you're asking me my opinion. Like, I'm not qualified to have an opinion on this, and they're like, well, you may, would you like to get a second opinion? I'm like, I don't understand the first opinion. What am I going to do with a second opinion? And I thank goodness that she has the patience to do the research and present like, hey, these are the things that we need to talk about. And I do the research too, and I look, and I think we're very deliberate in the way we have treatment plans and things like that. But I'm really grateful that she has it together. Now, if you asked her to read a spreadsheet, she couldn't tell up from down, and we laugh about that. She'll tell you that she went to social work school so that she never had to do math again. And
Right.
so I think we have a pretty good sense of humor about our lives.
I want to talk about Ella, your little
Mhm.
daughter, who we mentioned at the top of the show, was born with a particular condition called Coffin-Siris. But I think, to be fair, hopefully your kids will listen to this show, and they should, to see who their dad is in another way. Let's for a moment talk about Nama. Nama, your 15-year-old
Sure.
daughter. Well, what is she like, Benji?
Oh man, she has managed to be a really great balance of the good parts of me and Sarah. And I said earlier that I want my kids to have self-worth and the ability to stand up for themselves. And I see Nama, and I see Nama's friends, and there's a lot of 15-year-olds today that just have the self-worth that's just not there. And I'm really grateful that she both has the self-worth to know that she's worth it, and the humility to know that other people are too. She's got a great sense of humor. I When she gets like subtle jokes and we belly laugh about nonsense, it's the absolute best. When she was younger, pre-COVID, we were struggling with some of the stuff that like my dad and my mother-in-law were saying, and she was like, but I want, and I was like, dude, you got to have a sense of humor about this. And I showed her how I push back and sort of make sarcastic jokes and sort of do some of that. Now that I'm an adult, I can talk that way to my dad, or now that I can talk that way to my mother-in-law. And when she realized and understood the subtlety of those jokes, sort of everything changed, because she was able to push back a little bit. And then came the, hey, you took that too far. Jokes are one thing. You still have to respect the people around, and so sort of that balance takes a lot of emotional intelligence that incredibly she has. And so she's able to balance complex things with empathy, and I'm proud of her. She's a kid.
I mentioned before I have a 19-year-old son, and he passed through that age, 15, of course. And it was a bit easier, I'm guessing, for me raising a son than it would be a daughter, because I'm a guy, and I know what that's like. I know what it's like to be 15. I know what 15-year-olds like, at least loosely. Was it a challenge for you, or is it a challenge for you raising a girl?
Well, it's funny. It's the only thing that I know. Um, it's it's that's the deal, right? I don't have sons. I don't have any sons.
Hmm.
Um, one time she made a joke and she was like, "Do you wish that I was a guy and we could just play football together?" And I was like, "If you were a guy, we probably wouldn't play football together either, because that's not what I'm really in. Like, that's not." But we do woodworking projects together. Um,
Oh,
we talk about music together. As a joke, she got a Rolling Stones shirt one time, and I was like, "You can't wear that shirt until you can name 5 Rolling Stones songs." And she was like, "I saw this
yeah.
trend on social media. You're not supposed to be that guy." And I'm like, "I'm not that guy. I'm your dad." And by the way, if anybody ever asks you, you can now name 5 Rolling Stones songs. And she was like, "Oh wow, the Rolling Stones are really good." And I was like, "Yeah." So we have our things that we work on together.
So your little daughter, Ella, she's born, and was it at that moment, at that time, or shortly afterward, that the doctors told you about her condition, or did that come out later on?
It actually came out earlier. So we found out about Ella's condition when at Sarah's 20-week ultrasound. So they did the ultrasound, and uh, the doctor came in the room and was like, "Hey, we need to talk about this. She's missing this piece of her brain." And they were like, "It's not 100% conclusive, but it's likely." And by the time she was born, and they did tests, and they were like, "Yeah, that's the deal." Um, so that's called agenesis of the corpus callosum. So you have, I believe it's 12 bridges in your brain that connect front and back, right and left, top and bottom, and some cross sections. But the corpus callosum is the main bridge that connects the right and the left side of the brain. Now, she has all the nerves and she has all the fibers. It's just a question of how they're routed. So if I wanted to drive from Detroit to Windsor and the bridge was out, I could take the tunnel. If the bridge and the tunnel were out, I could go through Sarnia. If that was out, I could go through Buffalo, right? Like, those aren't as convenient, but I can get to Toronto without going through Windsor or Sarnia. Like, there's other ways to go, and that's how her brain operates. When she was 8 or 9, we found out about something called Coffin-Siris syndrome, and Coffin-Siris syndrome is a genetic mutation that causes structural defects in the body. So she has a few other conditions, none of which are as substantial as ACC, but they're all caused by this Coffin-Siris syndrome. And that is pretty rare. ACC has 6 to 7,000 known cases in the world. CSS has about 600 known cases in the world, and that's rare. But if you look at the 600 people who have it, you're looking at about 20 conditions with a mix of, right, everybody has their own version of that. It's kind of like you go into Subway and you pick, I want this bread and this vegetable and this meat and this sauce. You've got 20 options, but you've got 7 billion combinations. That's what
Mhm.
Coffin-Siris syndrome is like. So each person who has it has their own unique set of conditions that it comes with. And so one of the reasons why I talk about Ella so much whenever I'm in a podcast or doing some sort of public speaking or anything like that. You ever read the book Think and Grow Rich by Napoleon
I
Hill?
haven't. No. I have not.
So I read that book when I was in my 20s, and there was a number of things in that book that I thought were poppycock, but there was a couple of things that I thought were very relevant and good. And one of those things was he talks about how his son was born deaf, and he used to say publicly, "We're going to find a solution for his deafness." And people said, "You're setting bad expectations." And he says, "I'm not telling you when or how or who or what. I'm telling you that we're going to find something." And when his son was 17, doctors approached him and said, "Hey, we've got this phonograph that we think we can hook up to people's brains and help them to hear." And his son had the first of what we now call cochlear implants. And by the time his son was 20, he had 70% hearing. And I was like, that's unbelievable. So I take that and I say, listen, is there a vitamin that somebody could take that turns nonverbal people into verbal people? Probably not, right? That's not the way the world works. I don't know what's out there. I don't know what experimental therapy or exercise or drug or process or experience. I got no idea. But if somebody's working on something and they're researching, I'm the guy who's open to having a conversation with you. Actually, the other reason why I talk about Coffin-Siris syndrome and ACC so much is because when we got diagnosed, the doctor said to us, "Don't Google agenesis of the corpus callosum," which of course meant that I went home and Googled it right away. And the only thing that we saw was really awful medical pictures. There was no information. It was really scary. And I was like, "Uncle, I learned my lesson," and I never searched again after that. It wasn't until she was 5 that we found out that there was a Facebook group for parents, and there was an association, and there was an annual conference, and there was all this information. And I was like, how is it possible that we didn't know about this? And the answer was the first page of Google sucked, and I never made it to the second page of Google. And so I went on a campaign to write articles and be on podcasts and put out good content so that when people found out there's diagnosis of agenesis of the corpus callosum and they Googled it, they would get good resources. So I actually worked with the Friendship Circle to put out a whole bunch of blog posts with resources, with information, so that people would find good stuff. And we filled up the first page of Google with good stuff. Thank goodness that's not my job anymore, right? Other people have picked up that baton, and you Google ACC, you Google CSS, and you'll find good stuff. You actually still find some of my content out there, but that doesn't need to be my calling anymore, because now there's so much out there.
So Benji, I watched your TED Talk, and you did an excellent job.
Thank you.
Yes, I noted the fact that you actually referred to some videos and some pictures of your daughter, which gave the viewer a chance to understand the points that you were making. Now, your daughter, who's adorable, by the way, she can't express herself through words. Syllables are a big thing in her world. And she understands what's going on. She can process words and communicate in response, but not through words themselves, right? So walk us through that a little bit. As she was growing up, what was her communicative skills? How did she involve herself with other kids and other people? And how did you ensure, you and your wife Sarah, how did you, the two of you and your daughter, communicate with her?
Yeah, it's a great question. So the first couple of years were scary, and we were in a fog, just trying to figure out what. We had no idea whether she understood or didn't understand. I mean, it was really scary in those first couple of years. We eventually saw that she was responding, and that was huge. I think I mentioned in the talk the first time that I realized that she got it was I was listening to music while I was feeding her, and she started air drumming, and she was doing it right, and I was like, "Oh my god!" Like she gets it. It was so fun. Um, her. We refer to her sign language as a very sophisticated game of charades. And once you pick up a sign and make that sign, you are forever that sign, or that sign is relevant unless it changes. And so, there's foods or snacks that we have that Ella likes, and those always go in the same places, so that when she goes and taps on the cabinet in that location, we know that that's what she's asking for. She doesn't have to use her words. She doesn't have words. She can express it. That's what she's looking for. She made a sign for chewing gum, and that is like this because I don't know. She was doing it one time. We figured out, and so this is the sign for chewing gum. That's not ASL, but it works, and that's what communication is. It's things that you say that I understand. I think that the ability for you to come to my house and spend 15 minutes making eye contact and talking and listening and realizing that you can have a conversation with a 14-year-old with special needs who's nonverbal is pretty special, because there will be a lot of trial and error, and it's highly imperfect, but it's efficient and it works. And I'm really grateful for that. My grandfather used to say that if everybody took their peckle and put it on the table and inspected other people's, by the way, for anybody who didn't hear, peckle is a bag. It was like if you take your baggage and put it on the table and inspect it, and you look at other people's baggage and inspect it, like you'll end up taking yours off. End up taking yours back, right? You don't want other people's baggage. And when I look at other people in the special needs community and some of the hard and difficult things that they deal with, not that we don't deal with hard and difficult things, but we've learned how to deal with our hard and difficult things. And so I don't want yours and you can't have mine. We've managed to develop something of a language, and it works and it's functional. That said, if we can make it better, let's do that.
So do you have long drawn out conversations with Ella?
Listen, we're not discussing Nietzsche, right? We're not having conversations about astrophysics. But the truth is, we wouldn't have a very long conversation with astrophysics with me and somebody who understands astrophysics, right? So we can have questions and answers that go in and deep, but at the end of the day, it's not the same thing as having a conversation with Nama, and I'm not going to pretend that it is.
Well, what has it done to you, Benji, in terms of having to rise to the occasion to be a father for Ella? How has it changed you inside?
Well, I think I'm a better person. It's kind of a narcissistic answer for that, right? I think I've risen to the occasion. I think I'm doing a good job. I wasn't given an instruction manual on how to be a parent. I wasn't given an instruction manual on how to be an adult. I wasn't given an instruction manual how to navigate any of these issues. I'm using the tools that I have, and I'm doing the best that I can. And I hope that, like I said earlier, actually one of the blog posts that I did for the Friendship Circle about special needs parenting was I said that we came up with a mission statement for our family, like we do in business, like we do in everything else. And the mission statement was something along the lines of, we wanted to make sure that our kids had good communication skills and good relationship skills and felt satisfied in the lives in their lives and with the people around them. And that's true whether your kids are special needs or not.
Yeah.
I mean, that's just
Do you
that's just good
do,
parenting
do you
skills.
ever do you ever feel like a victim?
So I'm wearing a shirt that says atheist. Um, and I always laugh when people ask, like, why do bad things happen to good people? And, how could God allow the Holocaust? And, all those questions. And I think the answer, how could God allow kids to be born with these terrible, debilitating diseases? And the answer is, in the world of statistics, bad shit is going to happen, and bad things are going to happen, and hopefully good things are going to happen too. And so, am I a victim? No, I'm in the game, and in the game, you get some strikes, you get some balls, you get some hits. And if, I'm not a big sports guy, but if you're batting 300 in baseball, that means 70% of the time you're striking out, and 30% of the time you're making contact, and you're a Hall of Famer. And I think that that's true in life. There's some hard stuff that I have come my way. I've never had an honest conversation with somebody that didn't involve hard stuff. Anybody who's insulated from the hard stuff just means that you don't have a deep relationship with that person.
I find that families who have a child with special needs, I find that, be it the parents, be it the siblings, there is something very often much more sensitive about that family, much more in tune with life, much more present. Um, would that be an accurate description of your family? Are you guys just a bit more aware of the needs of humankind, of kids, of people?
I don't know that I would say that. I don't know that I would say that. I think that we have a unique blend of um, of special needs. Special needs peculiarities is not the right word. We have the parenting that comes from the special needs variety, right? That requires a certain ingredient. We also have parenting that comes from the recovery variety, and that requires some ingredients. We have some parenting that comes from just trying to be cool people, right? We're just trying to live a decent life, and that is also of that variety. And so I don't think that we're better parents than other people. I don't think that we're more empathetic than better people than other people. I think we're just, we have our recipe, and we're just trying to do that. Um, so
That's a great answer. That's a great answer. One of the projects that you've worked on or working on is called Storied.
mhm.
And I found that very compelling. You want to tell us about that?
Yeah, we're like 50 minutes into this. I thought we were going to be talking about that for 50 minutes and special needs for 10. So you caught me off
Right.
guard. I'm happy to talk about Storied. So Storied is sort of the culmination of the things that I've been passionate about for the last 4 years coming together in a very eloquent and incredible way. So my favorite television shows growing up were MTV Unplugged, VH1 Storytellers, and Behind the Music. I loved the idea of understanding how musicians tick, and what is their, why was this album written, and how did this bass player come, and why was this the album art, and he slept with her and she dumped him, and I remember watching the Fleetwood Mac episode. I was like, I got to watch it again. That was way confusing, like
Yeah.
those things were incredible. I remember listening to early Metallica albums and then saying, like, oh, this was the first bass player and this was the second bass player, like, and understanding that helped me listen to the music with a better understanding. So I love that stuff. We also talked about music, and I love music in general. Um, I'm a Jewish atheist, right? And we can talk about what that means after. But I sort of, my eyes were opened pretty drastically on October 8th when I realized that um, my liberal community, the people that I had marched with and that I had advocated for and that I had advocated with, were drinking poison Kool-Aid and were advocating for the death of my family. And I got lit on fire, so to speak. And I have completely changed my social media presence to focus on advocating for Jews in the Jewish community, talking about Israel, debunking, the game of whack-a-mole of blood libels and whatnot. What I realized was that you and I can be in a business setting, become uncomfortable, and walk away. You and I can be in a conversation, be uncomfortable, and walk away, or choose not to, right? But we have a choice. And Jewish students today don't have that choice. Jewish students, whether they're at Harvard University or Oakland Community College, they are in a classroom where a professor and fellow students are talking about them and their families in a negative and sometimes dangerous way. And I felt compelled to do something that was different. I keep going to Jewish events because I want to, right? But Jewish events today are hard. Sometimes they require like a box of tissues and a therapy appointment afterwards, right? We're talking about hostages and rape and death tolls, and it's hard. Actually, my father used to say that the two most dangerous things to the Jewish community are, number one, Holocaust education being a primary identity of Jews, right? You need to have something that you're proud of, not something that you're fighting against. And number two, the Yiddish expression, Schwelz is a Yid, right? The idea of it's hard to be a Jew. Well, if it's hard to be a Jew, why would I do that? We have better options today, right? Like we're not living in the shtetl. We have other options. Why do I have to live this difficult, Yentl type of life? Like, why do I'm what's his name? Muttel from Fiddler on the Roof. Like, I don't have to live like that. Why would I do that? And those two things on October 7th were combined and then amplified. And I realized that we have a struggle today. So Storied was my answer. Storied is an opportunity to look at your favorite music in the style of VH1 Storytellers, MTV Unplugged, and Behind the Music. But we're going to focus on where Jews and the Jewish community collaborated and contributed to the music. So the first show that we did was about Bob Dylan. And people were like, oh, great. So you're going to tell the Brian Epstein story. I said, Brian Epstein is one of 14 stories in this show. So we talk about the Beatles and the way that the Beatles were formed and the people who helped them move along and grow. And, the Beatles' career was 7.5 years. It was nothing, right? I mean, I've got genes that are older than the Beatles' career. The idea that like we can look at those stories and not Paul Simon's an important focal point. Bob Dylan's an important, like Jewish musicians are an important focal point. I'm talking about how Jews participated in making the non-Jewish community better. Okay. So that show was great. We had an amazing time. It was sort of like that Storytellers or Karlbach format where I tell a story, then the band plays a song, then I tell a story and the band plays a song, and back and forth. Then we wrote a second script called about the grunge scene. Okay, so now we're not talking about a band, we're talking about a movement And so we did 2 sets. The first set were the Jews who contributed to the bands, in different ways. So how Rick Rubin, was able to influence and contribute to the Red Hot Chili Peppers, and how different Sarah Silver, who was the manager and really the business manager for bands like Alice in Chains and Pearl Jam, and like she was able to sort of help turn these rugged 90s torn jeans guys into real bands, and just an amazing story. So I tell that story and then play the songs. And then the second set were the Jews who were in the bands. So everything from Chris Cornell, who doesn't sound like a Jewish name, but his grandmother was Jewish. Alanis Morissette, people don't realize this, she actually later in life discovered that her mother and father were both Jews who escaped the war and moved to Canada, and didn't tell their kids that they were Jewish until they were dying.
Geddy
Lee. So good reference. He wasn't included because that wasn't grunge, but we will for sure include Geddy Lee in a later later episode. Adam Duritz, one of the most incredible stories that I found was Adam Duritz, who's the singer in the Counting Crows. So he gave an interview 12 years ago, where he said that his parents were doctors. He was very privileged to be able to go to Israel as a teenager and live that sort of young Jewish Zionist life. And he said when he was 18 years old, he lived on a kibbutz for a whole summer. And that's where he learned work ethic, where he would wake up in the morning at the crack of dawn. He would work with his hands until nightfall and go to sleep exhausted. And that kibbutz was Kibbutz Nir Oz. And if you are familiar with the conversation, Kibbutz Nir Oz was one of the hardest hit kibbutzim on October 7th. That's where the Bibas family lives. That's where, or lived. That's where David and Ariel Cuneo lived. That's where Arbel lived. That's where Gadi Moses lived. Judy Weinstein, Nir Oz was hit hard. So I'm actually friends with Gadi Moses' son, Yair, and I had him make a video and talk about. Are you?
Yeah.
So
I interviewed him. Yeah.
You interviewed him. So I called him and had him make a video for this show talking about Nir Oz, and I can't wait to, for the next episode, the next time we play the show, where we'll have Gotti make that video.
You're a beautiful family. Beautiful family.
They really are. They really are amazing. They really are amazing. So the third show we did was about the Grateful Dead. That was, I think the legal term is a hoot and a holler. That was a ton of fun. And I'm in the middle of writing the script for our fourth show, which is about reggae and the Jewish contribution to reggae. And there's people will be amazed. This is not just the Bob Marley story. There's so much more that's involved in this show, and I'm pretty geeked about it. But we're in the process of producing a podcast where we take the stories, because each story is 3 to 5 minutes, story song, but each one of those stories could be 30 to 45 minutes. And so I've gathered experts or people who are relevant to talk to them, to interview them. And I'm looking forward to, putting that out. Hopefully that's going to be out later this year. So
tell me something, with all these things going on in your life, it does seem like your life is terribly meaningful and purposeful. And that's a good thing. Within that, is it correct to say that you are a Jew who does not believe in God, and yet you find all this meaning?
It's a great question. I mentioned earlier, that yesterday was my father's yortzeit.
Yes, you should rest in peace.
So I went to shul and I did the Haftorah. 2 weeks ago, 2 weeks ago was the 30th anniversary of my bar mitzvah, and I did the Haftorah for the first time since my bar mitzvah. So I went from not having done it in 30 years to doing it twice in 3 weeks.
That's beautiful.
And a friend of mine who continually laughs at me and says, "Benji, you're way too Jewish to be an atheist."
Yeah.
And I said to him, he said, the fact that you would come to shul and like learn the Haftorah, I'm dyslexic, so I can't just stand up and do it. I have to practice to make sure that I'm reading things properly. He said, the fact that you're an atheist, the fact that you're coming to do the Haftorah is proof that you're not an atheist. And I said to him, do you believe that Native American culture is beautiful and something that should be honored and respected? He said, of course. I said, do you believe that Buddhists and monks and those cultures are something that's beautiful and should be honored and respected? He said, yeah, of course. Right. I said, and let's get granular, like Shaolin and, Taoism. Do you believe that those cultures are beautiful and are should be honored and respected? He goes, yeah. I said, do you believe in a God with 7 arms? He said, no. I said, do you believe that our planet lives on the back of a turtle and flies through the universe? He said, no. I said, that's how I view Judaism. Judaism is the culture that I come from. It's the history, it's the nation, it's the community that I come from. And Judaism has some beautiful, amazing things. And there's a really deep history and culture and education and wonderful traditions, right? You can't walk through Jerusalem without believing that we have a beautiful history and culture, right? I was in Jerusalem a couple of months ago. They found Ir David and they're excavating Ir David, and we're going up these steps. And he's like, "This is 1,000 years older than the Kotel, right?" It's mind blowing. It's 1,000 years older than the Kotel. So I don't doubt that those things existed. I don't believe in the dogma. I don't believe in. I know that there was a temple. I don't believe that there was a cloud of smoke that went up perfectly without variation. Right? I believe that that's folklore. I know that there's a Torah. I don't believe that that's the word of God. I don't believe that Noah's Ark is a literal story. I believe that that's folklore, that those are beautiful stories that we tell children about our past and about our history, right? I believe that there were these figures, right? These are documented, documented history. Not all of it is documented, but like you get into the Nevi'im and Ksub, like you get into some of those laters, and some of that's documented. The people that came before that, beautiful folklore. It's an important part of our history, an important part of our culture. It doesn't mean that it has to be a literal story.
But does that mean you don't believe in God? Is that correct?
That means that I don't believe in God. Correct. Okay. I don't believe in God. Now, I believe in a higher power because of my experience in recovery. I believe in a world of, I believe in a lot of the tenets of Jewish life and Jewish culture, but I have a hard time believing in a God that is not accessible to somebody born on the other side of the world, right? Like it doesn't make any, how could you, I'm not telling you not to believe. It doesn't make sense to me that anybody, whether it's Jewish or Buddhist or Hindu or Muslim or Christian, like the idea that you could believe in a God, that somebody could be born on the other side of the earth and doesn't have access to that God because they weren't born in the same place or with the same parents or with the same access, like that to me is a wild belief system. So then I've got friends who get into it and they're like, well, you're not actually an atheist, you're a realist, you're a theist, call me whatever you want to call me. God bless. Forgive the pun. Right? Call me whatever you want to call me. I believe that the Torah exists as a book of beautiful things that we have blown out of proportion. And blowing it out of proportion is how we have our culture. And so I appreciate where we, like I appreciate that that's how we got here. And so that culture is rich and beautiful, but I also acknowledge that I don't like I don't believe that there was a woman who got pregnant at the age of 97 and then she died at age 127 and her son was supposed to be sacrificed, but then a god came and stopped them and put a goat instead. Like, I don't believe in any of that stuff.
This would require another podcast, a theological discussion, because while I understand what you're saying about the Torah and the mythological aspect of it, I get that. There's no archaeological evidence, at least directly, for what occurred in the Torah. There really isn't. There is later on in Nach. You're right. The question of God is to me is a separate one, somewhat. So we'll have to pick this up on our second interview.
I'm happy to do it. It would be great to document it, and we can arm wrestle this subject.
A little spiritual pugilism, So Benji, I've been playing around with AI for the last few months, and I find it really fascinating. I think there's greatness to it, and yes, of course, I realize that there's challenges. But what I've been doing is I've asking AI, to write a poem about my guests. So I have an ode to Benji Rosenzweig. You want to hear it?
I've heard this on a couple of episodes, and I'm blushing prematurely. So go for it.
I can see. So this is for you, Benji Rosenzweig, the son of Rabbi Rosenzweig, the previous rabbi in Kitchener, Ontario, from the son of Rabbi Rosenzweig, a previous rabbi in Kitchener, Ontario as well. In Kitchener's heart, where faith and song entwine, Benji Rosenzweig, a soul so bright, divine, son of a rabbi whose melodies still soar, Pitchuli Tzadika Tamar, legacies to explore. With chords of love, he honors his father's tune, an album born, a bridge from past to moon. Advocate fierce with a heart that never bends, for special needs his voice forever sends, inspired by Ella, his daughter, brave and rare, Coffin-Siris met with courage, love, and care. Sarah, his wife, a partner strong and true, Nama, their team with dreams that spark anew. In Detroit's pulse, Benji finds his beat, the city's food, its music, a soulful feat. From smoky dives to plates of savory delight, he weaves its rhythm into its heart's own light. A broker by day in commercial spaces wise, yet his spirit sings where community ties rise. Storyteller, speaker, creative, flame aglow, building bridges where hope and kindness grow. Benji, a force with music as his guide, carries his father's song with love and pride. Through every note, through every heartfelt plea, he crafts a world where all can live free. There you go. A note to Benji Rosenzweig.
That's wild. That's wild. I'm glad that it respected and honored Nama and Ella and Sarah in that beautifully too.
It's important, isn't it? It's really important.
Yeah.
I've done well over 200 podcasts, and one of the things I picked up along the road is don't forget about the whole family. Really, because I know Nama, her challenge in life, I'm sure at least a little bit would be, Mom, Dad, you're spending not enough time with me. You're tending to the needs of Ella. That would be a challenge of any second sibling, wouldn't it?
Yeah, it's a known phenomenon in the special needs community that the neurotypical, or you use a bad word, the normal, right? The child who doesn't have the conditions often feel invisible, and the need to be very deliberate in giving them attention and positive feedback and positive reinforcement, and them not feeling like an afterthought is important.
I mentioned at the top of the show that I like my viewers and listeners to take something out of the show that's poignant, that they can perhaps incorporate into their own lives. And I would say, just getting to know you, at least through my research and through this interview, you're one of those special people who's been able to bring your life around. And that is not easy for any of us. So what I would like to say to my viewers and to my listeners is, when the going gets tough, just dive right in. Listen to your friends, find those things that work for you. Not necessarily for others, but for you. Like in Benji's case, his friends really brought him on board in terms of a process whereby he would live a good life. He would live a happy life, as he said. And I first want to say to you, Kol Hakavod, which is well done, because your struggle clearly has been a challenging one, but you stepped up. And today it seems like you just really have a very special life, a special wife and two kids. You got some great guitars behind you. You have music in your life, and you turn your memories into positive ones. And I think that is a very important thing. So thank you for being my guest, and thank you for being so inspiring. You really are inspiring, Benji. Thank you.
Thank you, Avram. I appreciate it. I appreciate the opportunity to talk about this stuff with you. It means a lot.
You did a great job, and I look forward to doing our second interview down the road. We'll talk about God or the lack thereof.
Yeah, absolutely.
All right, folks. Thank you for listening. As they say in Yiddish, Zeigazint. You speak any Yiddish, Benji?
Enough to know what you said.
Yeah, right. Go in good health. Until we meet again, I thank you so much for your time and for listening. Feel free to be in touch. You can see at the bottom of the screen where you can reach me. And tune into Benji stuff. You can find them all over the internet. Thank you so much. We'll be with you again soon.